Hey gaming fans, so today I just want to talk a little bit about the God cards versus the Sacred Beast cards. Now obviously, their physical appearances are almost the same. I mean, you got Slifer over here, who's got the double mouth red kind of dragon, versus Uriah, which is pretty much almost the same idea. Then you got Obelisk the Tormentor, and then Raviel, which kind of looks like him. And then we got the Winged Beast, Winged Dragon of Ra, and Hammond Lord of Striking Thunder. Now, each of these cards has their own, pros and cons about playing the card. And the fact is, none of them are really competitive as far as being able to be played in any kind of major tournaments. But they do have their own popularity, and they've been around for quite a while. Obviously the God cards were a big part of the Yu-Gi-Oh movie that came out, and there was the show after that. I believe, for a little while the God cards were the focus of the series. And then the Sacred Beasts, I think they came out in like the GX era or something like that. But yeah, I just wanted to talk about not really the stories behind them, but just the cards themselves, and just some of the little bit of support that they've been given. Now, each one has been given support through the structure decks, of course. There was a Sacred Beast structure deck, which gave you all three, plus all these neat cards to go along with them. And then for the God cards, they've only released the Slifer and the Obelisk. We still don't have a Winged Dragon of Ra. But what I wanted to talk about was just the differences in the cards and the similarities. So let's start off with the Slifer the Sky Dragon. I think he's one of my favorites of the God cards. He pretty much has no limit to his power, based on your hand, of course. And they give us a couple of good cards to actually work with that, with like cards like Thunder Force Attack, which is a brilliant card that they made. You pretty much have to have Slifer on the field to use it. Destroy as many face-up monsters your opponent controls as possible. Then, if you activated this during your main phase, draw cards equal to the number of monsters destroyed by this effect and sent to your opponent's graveyard, and then you can only attack with one monster this turn, which would be Slifer. In fact, the deck I ended up building was based on just pulling this off altogether, just getting Slifer on the field, building up your hand, and attacking. Now, of course, he does have that limitation of he is as big as whatever cards in your hand is. And unfortunately, in this game, you start off with 5 cards, and to get this thing out, you gotta do 3 tributes, or you gotta sneak them out into play somehow, and you run out of cards pretty quickly. Oftentimes, you'll probably see him as a 3,000 attack monster, but you'd probably have like 3 cards, even 2,000 attack, which is fairly low. But he does have his second mouth effect, that if your opponent summons a monster, if it's pretty much destroyed, if it's not higher than 2,000 attack, which is an interesting effect, and it pretty much mirrors well with what is in the anime and what we saw on the cartoon. And of course, the counterpart here, which is a similar card, is the Uriah, Lord of the Searing Flames. They're obviously different monsters, and he's not supposed to be like his real counterpart, but he obviously has a lot of similarities, and he also has the his attack is based on the amount of something, based on the number of cards. Of course, we also have to notice that Uriah is a pyro monster of fire attribute, whereas Slifer is a divine monster, so he's a little bit different. This works with combos and stuff like that. The other thing that's different is that Uriah, for whatever reason, has 0 attack and 0 defense, whereas Slifer has question marks, making Slifer pretty much unsearchable by cards that search, like Sangan and Witch of the Black Forest, whereas Uriah, it's open season, you can grab him from any Sangan that gets sent to the graveyard. So that does give you a little bit more flexibility. For Uriah, though, the summoning of requirements is a little bit more easier. You just need to have 3 face-up continuous traps on the field, but there also is cards that work well with him. He's got a trap card that allows you to activate or to use set traps. So, I mean, there is ways to sneak him out into play. So, both I think are pretty unique. Both are in the fact you have to build a deck around them to really get the usage out of them. Obviously, with Uriah, you're going to have to play with a ton of continuous traps, because that's how big he gets. is the number of traps in your graveyard. So, which I like better because it's easier to fill up your graveyard than to fill up your hand in this game. So there's a lot of tricks you can do with that. Moving on to the Obelisk. Similar idea. I mean, Obelisk the Tormentor is very similar to his counterpart as well on the show, the anime version of him. He also requires 3 tributes, but he's got the 4,000 attack and defense, so he always has attack. So you get him out, he can attack. You don't have to worry about your hand. You don't have to worry about any other conditions. When normal summon, pretty much cards and effects cannot be activated, which is cool. You don't have to worry about him getting destroyed when he's summoned. And then neither player can target this card with card effects. And then once per turn, during the end phase, if this card was special summoned, send him to the graveyard, which is common with all the god cards. And then he's got this extra ability. You could tribute 2 monsters to destroy all monsters your opponent controls. This card cannot declare an attack this turn is activated. So it's pretty much got like a tributing effect. The Raviel is similar in its case. It's also a fiend and a dark monster instead of a divine. Pretty much all the same. They all have similar qualities there. Cannot be normal summon or set. Must be special summon from your hand by tributing 3 fiend monsters. Now I find that that's a little bit harder to do. Obelisk is just any 3 monsters, whereas Raviel is 3 specific type of monsters. But luckily cards like, Fiend Sanctuary exist, and, Sangan himself is a fiend, so if you send him to the graveyard, at least you get something back to your hand. But other than that, I find him to be the more difficult one to summon, without using the tricks from his structure deck to actually sneak him into play. But, other than that, he's okay. He's just like Obelisk in that you could tribute 1 monster. So he just tributes 1 monster versus 2, and then he gains an attack boost. And he could use his effect and attack on the same turn, whereas Obelisk, once he uses his effect, he can't attack that turn. So that's kind of a downer for him. So I'd say, out of so far, we got Slifer being probably, Slifer and Obelisk not being as good as their little counterparts down here. I would totally rather build a deck around them than the God cards. So for the last one, we'll save the best for last, is Winged Dragon of Ra. Now I say it's the best because this was the one that if you watch the anime, it was the most powerful card. In fact, all its effect from the anime couldn't even be put into one card. They had to make extra cards to, like alt mode cards, just so you can get all of his effects. But on its own, Winged Dragon of Ra I always felt was the weakest as far as the TCG printing of him. Very difficult card to play around with, in my opinion. I know there's support for him now, but this card cannot be special summoned. You must tribute 3 monsters, and it can't be negated, which is good. And it can't when you normal summon spells and traps and other monsters effect cannot be activated. That part is good. The part that's bad is when this card is normal summoned, you can pay life points, so you only have 100 life points to have this card gain an attack and defense equal to the amount you've paid. And then you can pay 1,000 life points, which is weird, because if you've activated this effect, you won't have the 1,000 life points to destroy 1 monster on the field, which is, whatever. I would totally say that this one is one of the more difficult ones. I mean, you pretty much drain your life points to 100. You have to have a ton of life points to make this card work. If you have your 8,000 still, he's going to be 7,900, which is powerful, of course. But the cost that you pretty much can just get knocked out by a single attack from anything. Anything with 100 or more, I should say. Whereas Hammond, on the other hand, actually comes with the 4,000. Again, he's got his little tricks from the structure deck, and he's got the same idea. Although I find this one to be a little bit more easier to pull off. You have to send 3 continuous spells you control to the graveyard, which is a lot easier to do. In fact, versus Uriah, where you have to send continuous traps, meaning you have to have all 3 of those traps set one turn, then you have to activate them, hope they don't get destroyed, and then wait on your turn, then activate them. Whereas this one, you can actually have the continuous cards in your hand, and you can summon this guy and go to town. And of course, he has his own card as well, which allows you to use face down spells to activate his, or to summon him. And then if this card destroys an opponent's monster by battle and sends it to the graveyard, you inflict 1,000 damage to your opponent. While this card is face up in defense position, monsters your opponent cannot target for attacks except for this one. So he's 4,000 body, he's in defense mode, all your other monsters are safe from attack. Really interesting that they give him this kind of attack negation versus the Winged Dragon of Ra, which only has a power up. But like I said, he does have his Spear mode, and I think there's the Phoenix mode as well. I don't have those cards, so I can't really talk about those ones. But that also makes your deck a little bit more cumbersome, and that you now have to have extra monsters in your deck. In fact, I think the Sphere mode people use just on its own, just because of its ability. But that being said, I totally think that the beasts, the sacred beasts, are a lot more manageable, easier to summon, and have a lot more support. I would wish that they would actually come up with some really good support cards for the God cards. I know they've done a little bit of a job where they got the Ultimate Divine Beast Trap card, the Ra's Disciple, and then little cards like these ones, like Fist of Fate, which only works with the specific God card, just like the Thunder Force Attack. This one is, this card's activation effect cannot be negated. If you control a monster whose original name is Obelisk the Tormentor, negate the effects of one effect monster your opponent controls, and if you do, destroy it. And if you do, for the rest of this turn, the effects of that monster are negated, as well as the activated effects of the field of monsters with the same original name. Then, if you activated this card during your main phase, you could apply this effect, destroy all spells and traps your opponent's controls. So it kind of gives you a Harpy's Feather Duster. Interesting card. I don't know if I'd want to play this. Like, if I'm playing a dedicated Obelisk deck, probably, but it's just a kind of underwhelming. The best one, though, is obviously Soul Crossing, which is the card that was also in the structure deck. If you're playing this, the God cards, you're gonna run this. During your main phase, immediately after this effect resolves, tribute summon one Divine Beast monster. When you do, you contribute monsters on your opponent controls, even though you do not control them. But if you tribute summon this way, apply this effect. Till the end of the next turn after this card resolves, you can only activate one card or effect per turn, not counting effects of Divine Beast monsters. So this is kind of like your Soul Exchange on steroids. This gets your God cards out fast. It's one thing that these things don't have, is that this ability to just rip your opponent's cards to summon the card. So, each one has their own little effects, and I think they were doing well with these structure decks. Obviously, like I said, these are not tournament decks. These are fun decks. Casual, for casual players. But it's still fun to actually, dive into the world of what they do in the anime, and be able to have these decks in real life. Hopefully the raw deck will come out at some point, if they even make one. Anyways, I just wanted to have a little chat about the gods versus the sacred beasts. I think so far the sacred beasts are still better. They got better support, and they're much more easier to summon. But you can't ignore how interesting the god cards are on their own. Anyways, hope you liked the video. Throw some comments down below. Tell me what your favorite ones are. I always like to hear what you have to say. Hope you subscribe. Talk to you later.